Welcome to Football Never Sleeps. Viral, maybe. Caffeinated, always. Coming from you in dwellings surrounded by frozen tundra, sadly. But this is your weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and a fan base that said its last goodbyes to coaching icon Lou Holtz today. I'm Eric Hansen in South Bend and grateful that my path crossed Lou's. He's Tyler James in LaPorte and grateful that the snow might melt by Wednesday. Together, we are the word salad avoiding content creators at blueandgold.com, part of a mega team covering the Irish for the On3 network. On tonight's show, we'll share some more player reflections from their time with Lou Holtz on and off the football field. We also have an early spring practice injury wrinkle. We've got lots of recruiting buzz for you, and as always, your questions. So start filling up that question portal. This is
Football Never Sleeps.
All right. Well done, Eric. I hopefully will not be accused of any sabotage for today's intro with the mic sounding better. And we appreciate everyone spending their Monday evening with us. We have an intro, a promo going on that's so well that I had it rolling during the intro there at the bottom, a spring sale for us. Blue and Gold On3 and Rivals spring sale just went live today. New subscribers get 50% off the first year of an annual subscription. So instead of costing you nearly $120 for an annual subscription, it's just $59.99 for the first year. Please take advantage of this deal before it expires. If you are not a subscriber to us over at blueandgold.com yet, use the link that's in our video description or head to blueandgold.com and hit the join button. You don't need a promo code or anything. It's a special deal for first-time subscribers this time of year. So if you've been thinking about it, this is a great time to do it. There'll be plenty of news to cover with spring football. Eric and Tyler Horker covering the women's basketball program. Jack Sobel and I are covering the men's basketball transfer portal watch. That'll be going on in the next month or so. And we'll have plenty of football and recruiting coverage with Kyle Kelly and Mike Singer leading the way there. So thank you for everyone once again tuning in live. Shout out to folks that are already in the chat. Eric, Jeff, Scott, Mike. Appreciate you guys chiming in already. Whether you're watching us live or on replay, please make sure that you're subscribed to us here on the channel. That is free. No entry cost there. Just hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button on this video as well. And we will get into today's show. And I felt that the only place we could start today was by talking about Lou Holtz and his legacy. Legendary Notre Dame head coach Lou Holtz was buried today on campus at the Cedar Grove Cemetery. A public visitation was held Sunday at the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, which was followed today by a massive Christian burial, a funeral procession, and a private funeral. Some former Notre Dame players gathered to speak to reporters earlier today, and you were there on campus. Eric, what were your takeaways from that experience?
So I spent most of my time with a couple of guys, Ned Bolkar and Steve Berline. Ned was a two-time captain for Lou Holtz in 88 and 89. He had a really interesting career. He was the USA Today National Player of the Year. That was a big deal back in the 80s, back when USA Today was a powerhouse publication. And he actually did a recruiting diary for them. But he signed with Jerry Faust, and then he and Lou Holtz inherited each other after a year. And what was really touching to me was that Ned has two kids, a son named Cash, and that's from his days, I think, as a Wall Street guy, and a daughter named Vivian. And Vivian was diagnosed maybe a year ago with leukemia, B-cell leukemia. And Lou heard about it and wrote this beautiful letter to the family, encouraging them and saying, hey, if you need anything. And it was really touching. And he talked about, those kind of connections with Lou Holtz. He also let it be known, and a lot of players are like this, that he wasn't the easiest guy to play for, and that was by design. I mean, Ned almost transferred his freshman year because of how unprepared they were after game one against Michigan, a loss to an unranked Michigan team. Notre Dame was ranked at the time, and how hard they had to work to become champions. But Ned is one of my favorites, and I was really happy to talk to him. I also talked to Steve Berline. Steve was the quarterback in the first Notre Dame game I ever covered back in 1983. And he was a kind of a surprise freshman. I was at the Columbus, Indiana paper and went up to cover Blair Keel starting that game, and it ended up being Steve Berline. And Blair was not happy, and it ended up being a pretty crazy story. But Steve and I have kept in contact over the years from time to time. It was great to visit with him. He had a great story about Lou interceding in a punt return drill and the results of that. I'll have that story tomorrow. The Ned Bolkart story, I encourage you to read that. That's online now, but the Berline will be tomorrow morning. Now, Steve only played for Lou for 1 year, but it so profoundly impacted both his life and his football life. And he talked about the ways that it did. And it was just really interesting. Chris Zorich was there. Corny Southall was there. There are a few others that had gathered in the Pete Chiavarelli Lounge for us to interview. But those were the two that I had a chance to speak with. I know Jack Sobel talked to some of the others. So there will be lots of kind of cool goal.
Yeah, Jack's story focused on Corny Southall, who was a safety on the '88 national championship team. He told the story of Holtz putting him in a headlock outside the Oval Office when Southall was working Secret Service for President Bill Clinton. Southall is one of 5 former Holtz players with sons on the current Notre Dame roster, with Bryant Young, Jerome Bettis, Jim Flanagan, and Ron Paulus also having kids on the team. Interestingly enough, Corny was a running back who became a defensive back, and his son came to Notre Dame as a walk-on wide receiver, and he's making the transition to running back this offseason. So there's a cool story there if you have the time to go over and read that on blueandgold.com from Jack Sobel. I was able to watch some of the funeral mass, and Skip Holtz gave a very just a great eulogy. I don't know how else to describe it besides using the word great. It was touching. I think it captured Lou Holtz well. I was going to highlight some of the things that Skip said about his father. He said, it's not what he did, it's how he did it. He was honest, built his life on trust, commitment, and love. He was a builder. He believed in you more than you believed in yourself. He was a motivator. He was detail-oriented. He was a prolific letter writer. He was the king of one-liners. Those were some of the things that he said about him. I think everyone who's encountered Lou Holtz in some way knows of his humor, his wit, and certainly the guys who play for him know how ferociously competitive he was and that he was tough on his players. Skip said that his father believed in physical toughness to win a football game. He believed in mental toughness to win in life. And he even said that while his father was in hospice care for the final 7 weeks of his life, he asked his visitors, "What can I do for you?" I thought that was pretty incredible, and speaks to the way Lou Holtz approached people in his life, and the way Skip Holtz ended his eulogy was, if you met him, you were happy. If you interacted with him, you were lucky. If you were friends with him, you were favored. If you were coached by him, you were fortunate. If he was your dad, you were blessed. So if you haven't checked that out, I will put the link in our comments section, so you can check it out if you haven't. It's towards the end of the proceedings from earlier today, but certainly a moment that if you're a Notre Dame football fan, it's worth either watching that or listening to some of his former players talk about him, because there has been a lot of cool stuff to come out. Obviously with the sad news of Lou Holtz's passing, but the celebration of his life as well.
I want to share one liner from Steve Berline. We're talking about how Lou, in just the 1 year affected him as a quarterback. And he said, look, he goes, it really helped because the detail oriented and stuff. He goes, but I was a lot better runner than Lou was giving me credit for. He said that the way he described it was, in a race between a pregnant woman and Steve Berline, Steve would finish third.
Oh man, yeah. He had. I've went through and transcribed some of the quips he made just on our podcast. What that was in October, I think.
Yeah,
And he was
right
still
before USC.
still cracking us up for that one as well. Moving back to the current state of affairs with Notre Dame football program, we had one early injury note that came out today. We are scheduled to receive more details about Notre Dame's injured players later this week before spring practice gets underway. But head coach Marcus Freeman mentioned one of note during his appearance on Always College Football with Greg McElroy. He said that presumed number one running back Aeneas Williams will be limited during spring practices. He didn't provide details beyond that, but we'll work to get some more clarity on that later this week. Obviously, Keatron Young is still working his way back from an ACL injury last year. So, as a result, how much of an opportunity does this create for Nolan James Jr., Javian Osborne, and Jonas Walton going into this spring, Eric?
I think they still had a big opportunity if Aeneas was there. I think when it's just the three of them, they're just going to get more reps. And so they're going to get more opportunities to learn, more opportunities to show who's 1, 2, 3 among that group. And so I think that's really good. I mean, getting more reps with CJ Carr, I think is good. I think that I'm of the opinion that it will be probably a 3-man rotation. Maybe it'll be deeper than that, but not the 2-man that we saw last year. So one of those 3 would be in that rotation, but I think it's a really good opportunity, and that's what you have to do. That's kind of Marcus Freeman's philosophy is you make the best out of a situation. Now you don't have your number one running back. Your 3, 4, and 5 are going to have a chance to show that they belong in that rotation.
Yeah, I think we all felt that these guys were going to get opportunities this spring because there's so much uncertainty in terms of proven depth at that running back position. But I think it just adds some more energy, some more pressure to the competition, I would say, when you're going to be getting even more and more carries, more and more reps. I think there's some pressure on Nolan James Jr. to step up as the guy who's been in the program going into his redshirt freshman season. And then obviously Javian Osborne and Jonas Walton are trying to learn on the fly and make strong first impressions for themselves. And I think both are capable running backs. I think Nolan James Jr. is probably someone that we don't talk enough about just because he didn't have a highlight reel freshman season by any means. And he wasn't as ballyhooed of a recruit as Osborne and Walton, but I think he's a talented running back in his own right. He's maybe a little bit undersized, but has a lot of physical attributes that help him move the ball down the field. So obviously the running game is going to be a huge part of Notre Dame's offense still moving forward, even though we expect the passing game to take greater strides with CJ Carr going into his second year as a starter. But it'll be interesting to see how these guys sort of make a name for themselves this spring. All right, I want to hop into questions. We don't have many yet, so if you have a question, please feel free to submit them. I know we sort of trampled all over the questions that Jeff had asked about running backs, but first one I have here is from Eric Swope. Regarding position groups and the chemistry between new coaches and student athletes, which group do you feel needs to grow the most in development?
Okay, why don't you start, because I need to make sure that I understand the question before I answer it.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the position groups and the chemistry between the new coaches and the players, I would say probably defensive line is where I feel like there needs to be the most growth and development. I think you have sort of an established player in Boubacar Traore, who you think you know what he can give you, and that his ceiling will be continued to raised with Charlie Partridge coming in. But beyond that, I think even Bryce Young is someone who has certainly made an impact in his first 2 years at Notre Dame, but has more left to reach, and they're interesting to see what sort of strides he makes under Partridge. And then I think the defensive tackle sort of overhaul of the offseason is something that we will be watching who emerges there. So I think that is going to be a big storyline. Obviously, you have Keon Keeley coming in from Alabama. We have Rodney Dunham, a freshman who could maybe can he get in the mix. Logan Thomas is someone who maybe needs some physical development still until he gets on the field regularly. So I think the defensive line is where I would be looking at most closely for the most development.
Eric, I just want to make sure I understood your question right. And so I'll answer it in a couple ways. One is if there were no new coaches, if it were just the position groups on defense that we were talking about, I would agree with Tyler right out of the chute that it's the defensive line, just because of all the reasons he said. Irrespective of what Charlie Partridge brings to the table, I think that the adjustment to Charlie will be easier in some ways just because of his familiarity with Chris Ash. Given the fact, throwing the new coaches in there and the chemistry, the guy that knows Chris Ash the least is Brian Jean-Marie, and yet you look at the linebackers, they're pretty seasoned. The defensive backs are pretty seasoned too. So I think it still leads me back to the defensive line thing. And I just have a feeling Charlie's going to have a different way of doing things than Al Washington did too. So I hope I answered that. Okay, if not, go with Tyler's answer.
Well, you gave the same answer, so
well, yours was in English. Mine was kind of in gibberish.
Defensive line is the only answer you're getting from us, Eric. Jeff said, "Why did we only get a medical update today on running backs and not the entire team?" That was just a product of what I think Marcus Freeman was asked about the running backs on that podcast, and so he mentioned those things in passing, explaining Notre Dame's running back situation. And so that's why that happened. We'll get a greater debrief on Wednesday when we talk to the staff. But that's right. Why
Wednesday's the day to check out blueandgold.com for all that news.
All right. Irish fan 1010 says, who do you have winning it all in your March Madness bracket?
I have not even looked at March Madness bracket, and I'm not sure that I'll fill one out for the first time in decades. I don't know. It's like throwing darts for me. I didn't watch much men's basketball. I may do it just for the fun of it, just because I like to see if I can beat people that have been following college basketball a year. Now, I will fill out a women's bracket because I cover women's basketball, and I know that game a lot better, and I feel like I have a much better chance of doing well both locally and nationally in that. But the men's, I have no idea. I would be, again, I mean, I don't think even Duke is necessarily a good pick given some of their injuries. So I don't know. Tyler probably already has his filled out and turned in.
No, I am a procrastinator when it comes to my filling out my bracket. I want to know everything possible. I want to know who's winning the playing games, even though there's maybe only a couple of those that actually matter. In terms of even first round games, but I haven't filled one out yet. I don't know which way I would head. I think, the injury, Duke is who I think, if healthy, is the best team. I think Arizona might be the hottest team right now. I think Michigan's very good too. They've had some injury issues as well. So I have not filled that out yet. I'll wait till probably the late hours of Wednesday night to do that, and we'll see how it goes. I'm interested to watch it, and we'll see if there's any future Notre Dame players in any of those rosters, because Notre Dame needs to bring in some help through the transfer portal this offseason with it on the men's basketball side specifically.
Yeah, I'll tell you, on the women's side, it's going to be really hard to pick against either Connecticut or UCLA. I think there's a couple teams in that tier that could challenge them on a bad day for one of those teams. But those are the two teams. One of those two teams, I think, are going to cut down the nets.
All right. Scott Fegan says, what changes is Marcus Freeman making to have the team more prepared for the opening game this year?
We talked about this a little bit last week, I think. They've really done it, and he kind of reiterated it on the ESPN podcast that he did today with Greg McElroy. They really took advantage of being left out of the playoff. So they got a week of practice in December during finals week. And then they really geared their winter workouts to pair both physical training, which last year they were playing games until January 20th, so they were able to do their weight stuff in the weight room, but they also did the football school concept where they were teaching concepts that would help install the latest up-to-date offenses and defenses and get them fundamentally moving in the right direction. So hence Notre Dame did a lot in the weight room, but you didn't hear so many horror stories about the culture shock from the newcomers coming in. And so again, I think they're going to be, once they hit the ground running on Friday with spring practice, I just think they're going to be farther ahead schematically. And that's also a product of having the same quarterback back. And for the first time since 2019, having both coordinators back for a second year in a row.
Yeah, I think the leave no doubt mantra will play a role in the heightened intensity going into the start of the season for Notre Dame. Not that you never are intentionally like overlooking something, and I don't know that necessarily that's what happened for Notre Dame last season in terms of why they lost to Miami, but Notre Dame could be at risk of that going against maybe a Wisconsin team that isn't as touted as some of the last season. My video is going in and out. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Your video is freezing. I think both of our. No, I'm moving. You're not. Move your head around. Okay, you're frozen, but I am hearing you. So, and now I'm not hearing you. So while Tyler is frozen in time and probably frozen from this weather at 17 degrees, I think, 24 degrees right now. My bad. I'll go ahead and talk to you guys a little bit more about choppy video for TJ, they say. Okay, I'll talk to you a little bit more about the reflections about Lou Holtz. Last week, I did a couple stories. I did an inside look on the relationship between Lou Holtz and his players, and I used Aaron Taylor, who played for him from 1990 to 1993. He was a two-time All-American offensive lineman, won the Lombardi Award, was first-round draft choice. And again, with a lot of these players, it was, I wouldn't say a love-hate relationship, but it was a relationship where they didn't like him a lot of times. He was very hard on them during their time, and yet they understood that's what it took to set the standard. And I think once they got beyond their Notre Dame playing days, they were really grateful that he was that hard on them. But while it was happening, it was really difficult. Tyler, are you back with us?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep, we can.
All my internet went out, so sorry about that, folks.
Okay. Well, we can just pick up from the questions wherever we were, or wherever you want to go. I was just doing some Lou Holtz reminiscing while we were waiting for you to come back.
All right, no problem. Apologies for that, folks. We got a question here from Patrick Sapkowski. Have you heard anything about the backup quarterback situation?
Well, it hasn't started yet, but I think what you're asking is, do we hear any buzz from inside the Goog about who we think will eventually end up there? I think Tyler and I both have different ideas about who we think will end up being the number 2 quarterback. I still believe that when all is said and done, Teddy Gerard will be the number 2 quarterback at some point in 2026. Now, he's not on campus now, so he's not going to be the number 2 quarterback in the spring. What I'm not ruling out is one of the other 2 guys really stepping up their game. And sometimes when you hear the footsteps, you're able to do that. I think Blake Hebert is an amazing athlete who would be really good in a zone read system, where maybe the wide receivers weren't as strong as they are on this year's team. If he can round out his game where he's an elite thrower, that puts him in a really good position. I'm not optimistic that that happens this spring. But again, there's surprises all the time. And Noah Grubbs, what I like about Noah is just his it factor, that the guy plays above his expectations when the lights are on. And he did that this season with a team that probably should have been in a little bit of a rebuild, didn't have a lot of obvious division. I don't think it had any other obvious division one players on the team. Maybe some young ones will turn into that, and led them to a state championship in a state that it's really difficult to win state championships in a class where it's really difficult to win with that kind of talent. So I really like Noah Grubbs, but for me, Teddy Gerard is the guy that I'm keeping my eye on for the long term.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be a true competition if before spring started we had like an answer of who the backup quarterback was going to be, and I think that is the thing above all that needs to be known, is that it is a true competition to who can be the backup. That's why they asked Teddy Gerard if he wanted to enroll a year ahead of time and join the program in the summer, and that's why. I mean, Noah Grubbs was always going to enroll early. That wasn't something that changed, but he's starting this week. He is, I mean, I guess starting since he got on campus, but in terms of being in a practice, like he's going to be in competition with Blake Hebert for that backup quarterback job. And I would probably expect Blake Hebert to take the first snaps of spring practice as the backup quarterback. But I think that as the spring evolves, they're going to have all kinds of opportunities between the two of them. And we'll see how they pick up the playbook, how they pick up what defenses are trying to do against them. And they'll be asked to sort of earn that backup role behind CJ Carr. All right. I wanted to get into what we would plan to focus on Friday when Notre Dame begins spring practice. Eric, we've spent a lot of time in the last month discussing the various storylines and position battles that will be worth monitoring throughout the spring and into the fall. But what will you be trying to focus on the most during that first spring practice, which we get to see all of?
Well, I'm going to be focusing on the newcomers because there's so many of them. There's a lot of guys I haven't ever seen play, and there's going to be now, not everybody's healthy, but I mean, just counting, there's 25 early enrolled freshmen. There are 7 of the 8 transfers are on campus right now. Again, we're not sure about Quincy Porter, for example, being able to play, but still that's a staggering amount of newcomers. And what you can see on the first day, you can get a sense of, what do they look like physically? What do they look like from a speed and physicality standpoint? I mean, they're not tackling, they're not, there's no contact, so you're not getting that. But there are times where you could say, whoa, that guy is way fast. I remember Jadarian Price going, and there have been other players where the first day of practice, you're like, they really get your attention and you want to see more. Unfortunately, we don't get to see as much as we like, but we will be able to compare it later in the spring before the Blue Gold game. We have a full practice in pads a week before the Blue Gold game. And that is super revealing in terms of our early impressions. I'd also like to see, what the quarterbacks look like throwing the ball, and also who lines up where. Sometimes there are certain drills where there's a tell on who are the ones right now, who are the twos, and again, these are all in pencil, so it doesn't mean the world, but it's kind of interesting sometimes who lines up as the ones coming out of the gate. How about you, Tyler? What are you looking for?
Yeah, particularly on the offensive line, we're curious of what the first mix looks like there, and what that like you said, it's something that's written in pencil, because Drew Rudolph was not a stranger to changing things up on the fly and even late into the fall. So I think that'll be something that we'll be interested in seeing how they're using and who is available on the offensive line in that first practice. I think the newcomers is a great point. And I think even if whether you're a transfer or a freshman, you can get a sense for guys that like feel confident and comfortable in what they're doing in their first practice, even if they maybe don't know everything they're doing. They they carry themselves in a way that they're like, oh, this guy belongs. And that probably happens more with freshmen than transfers, but I think it is important with transfers, especially when we're talking about more undergraduate transfers for Notre Dame with guys that don't have a ton of playing experience in some cases. So I think that will be something that will be worth monitoring. And the wide receiver position, obviously, if Porter's not active, but if Mylan, what's Mylan Graham look like? Who else stands out? What does Jaden Greathouse look like? Who of the young guys are sort of scratching to move up into the rotation? I think the defensive line in general, that's the I answered the question earlier about who has the most growth to have with the new coaching staff and on defense and new players on the defensive line. I'm very interested to see what they look like. A D-line in the first practice of spring, you're not exactly seeing their physicality be tested against an offensive line, but you will get a sense of, okay, what does this unit look like? What are the guys that are real contenders here moving forward for Notre Dame up front? And then just overall the defensive coaching staff, like how are those guys interacting with their players? What do they maybe do differently than previous coaching staff members did? What's the sense that we can get from first impressions of them on the practice field? I think those are sort of the things that I'll be trying to keep an eye out for in the first practice. And it goes faster than you think. You think you have all kinds of time, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got to get out of here. It's time to get ready for post-practice interviews. All right, next, Eric, I wanted to talk about sort of distinguishing real or fake, not news, but developments as it relates to spring practice. Sometimes we see guys have big springs and they lead to big things in the fall. Sometimes we see guys have big springs and it didn't actually mean much. So what do you think the key is to distinguishing the difference between a true spring riser or a spring mirage?
For me, what you see with your eyes and what you're hearing from the coaches have to sync up. If one of those feels off, it usually is a false alarm. Also, does this player have a history of being the flavor of the week and then not being a guy that you hear a lot in fall camp? How big is the sample size? That also, if it's the first week of practice, they're not in pads yet, and you get super excited, I think you have to wait a little bit deeper into spring. And then other thing is, are there other players in play that aren't practicing right now? So let's say we got really excited about Jonas Walton. And I think we will get excited about Jonas. But knowing that Keedron Young and Aeneas Williams, we may overstate how big his role might be in the fall. We meaning the other people that cover the team, not us. No, but I think those are usually when I can remember a lot of flavors of the weeks where I was like, I'm not biting on this. So, and I guess there's some that I've got sucked in. I think Houston Griffith, the first time I was pretty excited about it. And then when it kept happening, I said, nope.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a mix of, okay, how sustainable is this? What are the circumstances of why it's happening? And a lot of times it's also just if you dig a little bit in terms of talking to people, hey, did you just have a good practice that we saw? Are we just seeing a glimpse of good moments and maybe there's other issues that maybe we're not seeing that would prevent that person from taking those next steps? I think there's a few different things that could be at play there in terms of trying to figure out what's real and what maybe isn't going to be lasting. Do you have
real quick add on to that? Sometimes the best tell are the players themselves, the teammates of the player. They'll say Ben Morrison is going to be really, really good.
Yeah.
They were right.
And sometimes I would say more times it's even better if like you don't ask them about someone specifically, but they bring someone else up. And that goes for the coaching staff too. Like if you're going to ask the defensive line coach about Brendan Vernon, he's going to have to tell you about him. But if he doesn't bring him up in any other context, it's probably not a good sign for that player because they're not necessarily ascending. Although there could be in the area of NIL and transfer portal, there could be guys trying to hide things, but with there being no spring transfer portal, there's no need to hide anything. These guys they're supposed to be locked in for next season, so hopefully that means more and more transparency from the coaching staff. All right, do you have examples of guys that had big springs that ended up mattering?
I try to go through the current roster, and I came up with 4, and then I'll give you one kind of a historical one. The guys on the roster that I think had that kind of spring that propelled them. Adon Schuler, after his redshirting freshman year. Jaden Osbury, I mean, he didn't propel him to a starter, but it propelled him into relevancy. He was a guy they weren't quite sure where he fit, but he was having such good practices. They said, we got to figure out a role for him. Jason Anye, although it was kind of delayed, like Jason Anye, when he came in, I thought this guy's never going to play. He came in as a defensive end. He bulked up to a defensive tackle, was really quiet for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden in one spring, it was like, whoa, Jason Anye. And his first year, he was a contributor, but not a significant one. And then he became one. And then Jaden Greathouse, as a freshman early enrollee, had an amazing spring, had really good chemistry with Sam Hartman. As a historical one, CJ Procise is the guy that jumps out in my mind. He came to Notre Dame as a safety, moved to wide receiver. One spring, they were really short on running backs. They experimented with him, and boom, that spring turned out to be very telling for him. Do you have some that stick out for you?
Yeah, Schuler was one guy that I had written down. I would say Tay Johnson probably applies too, although it didn't turn into like a starting job in the fall. But I think we started to notice Tay Johnson last spring.
He was my crush. That's why I didn't want to say that.
Going back farther, guys that came to mind to me were a couple of linebackers. Tavon Coney, I think it was 2017. He played quite a bit in 2016 because anyone with a pulse was playing because they were so bad. But he became a real like stalwart that following spring and someone that was I think he led the team
when he had an actual defensive coordinator to coach.
Yeah. So I think that was a big takeoff spring for him. And then the next guy was Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa, who his first 2 seasons with the program didn't do much, was injured his sophomore year, and then thrived when he took over the rover role in the spring of 2019 when Asmar Bilal slid inside, and that was obviously the launching point for a successful tenure at Notre Dame for Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa. All right, do you have some examples of the opposite, the guys that maybe were good in the spring and didn't last?
Houston Griffith, and I really like Houston, but he was always the winter workout warrior, and he just impressed the heck out of you the first few practices, and you're like, this guy is going to be a difference maker. And he was a good player for Notre Dame. He just was never a standout. Chris Brown, until he was late in his career, Breezy's looking great this spring. That's what they called him, Breezy. And eventually Chris Brown did have a really good year his last year, but he would be a fall fader. And there were a lot of wide receivers that fell into that category for me. And always kickers never looked good in the spring, so they were kind of the opposite because of the crappy weather. So who's some of the faders you remember?
Yeah, the wide receivers were the ones that came to mind to me, and maybe that's an indictment of the lack of success at the position that has hurt Notre Dame and the desperate need for guys. Maybe we just overhyped them because we're always looking for someone to step up. Well, one's probably unfair. Kevin Austin, the one COVID practice before COVID practice we saw, he had this amazing spring practice, and then spring practice itself got canceled, and then obviously 2020 was an interesting season, and he had to deal with some injury issues. Tobias Merriweather in 2023, I feel like was like, okay, now it's Tobias's time. He's starting to make some flashes in the spring, and that didn't lead to anything. Braden Lindsey's probably another guy that would fall into that category, that maybe like, okay, this is the time he's turning the corner, and just didn't become a star. Like, obviously those guys impacted, like all those guys played to different extents for Notre Dame, but maybe didn't rise in the way that we were expecting, or maybe even hoping they would, because of the need for some of those guys to sort of take a step and ascend to new heights. All right, let's hop into some more questions we have here. Beef Eater says, Eric, did you see the picture I sent you from the funeral live stream? Should we call the Pope and ask if it was a miracle?
So Beef Eater sent me a text, and he sent me a picture and thought one of the angels. Now, you'll have to correct me if I get this message wrong, because I haven't had a chance to text him back. He thought one of the angels in the basilica looked like Marcus Freeman.
All right.
And I thought, well, let's see if he was having a beer or 8 this afternoon and clears this up later. So I'm giving him a grace period. I did not see the resemblance to Marcus Freeman, but maybe I need to go to the eye doctor too.
All right. Scott Fegan says, will Charles Jagosa practice this spring?
Well, we're going to find out Wednesday. I'm guessing that he will. If he does, it will not be full contact.
All right. And Mike DeVoy says, what distinguishes nose tackle from defensive tackle? I always thought nose tackles were big space eaters versus defensive tackles, but I wouldn't describe Cross or Heinisch that way. Who are the best nose tackle candidates on the current roster?
So, some of it is, you can do a lot of things with those positions, and it depends whether you're a 34 front or a 43 front. So, example, if you're a 34 front, you want somebody like Lewis Nix. You can't have Howard Cross, a guy that's less than 300, to be your nose guard in that configuration. You need the Buddha kind of guy. Lewis Nix would be the prototype for that. If you look at this roster, Sean Sevillano Jr. would be the 34 kind of nose guard. In terms of when Notre Dame plays an even front, you have some flexibility. They're not always like right over the center. They have different roles and so forth. Tyler, how would you best describe the difference between a 3 technique and what the nose does? Because they've had different body types for both, and there's players that have played both that are on this roster. Jason Agne's played both.
Yeah, and I think they have had leaned into some versatility with that, with guys that maybe will slide in and out to maybe keep the offense on their toes and not necessarily know how they're going to align. I would say that you generally will have someone that could rush the passer a little bit better at your 3 technique versus your nose tackle. You still want your nose tackle to be physically dominant, whether it's taking up space or just hard to move. Like Howard Cross was hard to move,
and had incredible hand quickness.
Hand quickness and hand strength. Guys would talk about if Howard gets his hands on you, forget it. It doesn't have to be defined by height and weight, or limited by height and weight. That strength and explosiveness can mean a lot too. So I think probably both of Notre Dame's incoming transfers might be good nose tackle candidates, Francis Brew and Tion Gray. They're different players, right? Gray is 6'6" and Brew's 6'1", I think is what they're listed at. So there's a physical difference between those guys. And I think a 50-pound weight difference even. So there's different ways to go about it. You can have success with different body types and do different things. And I think we'll see what does Charlie Partridge prefer from those 2 positions. I don't know that I can speak with a ton of confidence in how he sees things as it relates to nose tackle versus defensive tackle. And so that'll be something that we can get a better sense of as we watch things throughout the spring.
Right. Again, 34 is a different game. Like Aiden Kiana is another guy that would have probably thrived in a 34 rather than being in a 43 look.
But yeah, like you mentioned, like Jason Onia, he can play both. Elijah Hughes is more of a defensive tackle than a nose tackle, probably. Cole Mullins is probably more of a defensive tackle than a nose tackle. Christopher Burgess Jr., who's making the transition from defensive end, he's more of a defensive tackle than a nose tackle. You're more likely to see those guys that are converted defensive ends be that three technique defensive tackles, and then the guys that maybe played more defensive tackle in high school tend to grow into those nose tackles. All right. I think that's it on questions. So let me get back to our document here. We wanted to talk a little bit about Marcus Freeman's evolution as a head coach. I think someone, maybe it was Scott, asked the question about Marcus Freeman. What's he doing to better prepare Notre Dame for its opener this season? What do you think are the ways that Marcus Freeman needs to address his own improvement this offseason?
Well, that was number one for me. Number two, I would say, I mean, it's still a continual balance between really having the physicality you need in practices and being smart about not beating up your starters in the spring, or people that are invaluable that you just can't afford to lose for the fall. I think that's something that Marcus continues to look into. I think a lot of where Marcus's growth and so forth, and he's good at it, but where it's going to be required is roster management. Walking that line of about creating a college culture in an environment where there's pro principles when it comes to finances and so forth. I mean, these compensation packages are getting pretty big, and a lot of the players know what the others are making, and you want to make sure that there's not problems there. You also want to make sure that, again, and I think Marcus does a great job with this already, about putting the team first. So you're not thinking about, okay, what kind of accelerator clause can I have in my NIL? But I mean, right now he's kind of considered one of the top 5 coaches in the country. So it's about keeping up with the changes in the game on and off the field. I think when you look at the great coaches, and Lou was one of them. I mean, you look at Saban and some of the changes that he made over his career. There are certain principles that you're always going to stick to, but there has to be this evolution with the game, that you're not turning into Brian Van Gorder, where you're a Broyles Award winner one year and then a decade later you're obsolete. So I think just keeping up with all the changes is another big part. And Marcus doesn't need anybody to give him that clue. He's kind of a self-starter when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, being prepared for the start of the season is certainly, I think, at the top of the list, like you mentioned, and we were asked about. I think he has to continue to hone in on knowing his team's strengths and weaknesses better in preseason camp to prepare them for the beginning of the season. And the better you know your own team, I think the better prepared you are to take on the challenge of the teams that are across the field from you. I think certainly defensively there were issues that Notre Dame had last season to start the year. I think this time around Chris Ash is a returning coordinator and not a new coordinator at Notre Dame. So you would think that they'll continue to be on the same page as they were throughout most of last season. And so just making sure that there's no hiccups there, especially when you have new coaching staff members under Chris Ash. I think I wouldn't, it's not necessarily a concern, but I think it's something you can't assume. It's just making sure like the NFL stuff is just not in play. Like it's not something you're thinking about. It's no longer like you can entertain it in the off season if you want to, but that can't be something that is clouding anything you're doing as you're preparing your team for the off season. I don't think Marcus Freeman is someone that would let that happen to, but I think you sort of have to be honest with yourself and sort of making sure you're flushing that, and whatever interests and pursuits you were listening to, that's just a part of the past. for you. I think there's always things you can push for in terms of finding better ways to prepare your team with strength and conditioning, working with Lauren Landau. Like what have we learned so far in our time together? Where can we improve? What are things that we did? How does this off season look different than last off season? We were coming off such a short off season, coming off the playoff run. Now we have as long as an off season as you can get sort of for Notre Dame. How have we maximized that? How can we continue to maximize that to better prepare us for this coming season? And then the last one is another thing that I don't necessarily think is something that you would associate with Marcus Freeman, just making sure you don't refusing to settle in recruiting, like making sure that you're continuing to push forward and not like you raise sort of the ceiling with what you did with the recruiting class last year. Okay, let's not just assume we can roll out our campus and that's going to continue to happen. How do we continue to push buttons to make sure that we're resonating with recruits, make sure that we're finding the best recruits for us, and identifying talents that maybe you're ahead of the curve on, like guys that maybe aren't 5 stars right now but could develop into 5 stars. That's what we saw with a number of guys in this past class, ended up growing into 5 stars. They were already talented. It wasn't like Notre Dame dug them out of nowhere, but they were guys that developed and were continuing to grow going into their senior seasons and showed even a higher ceiling going into that. So that's probably a longer list than you would think for someone going with a chance to win a national championship and as good as a head coach as Marcus Freeman is. But I think these are just all things that you have to you can't get complacent on as you're trying to be the best of the best.
One thing that we both forgot was constructing a media appreciation lounge in the new Shields Hall. Just kidding.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up with recruiting stuff. Eric, do you want to team me up with this big recruiting weekend ahead for Notre Dame?
Okay. So Notre Dame will host a major recruiting event Saturday with its Juniors Day. How does this visitors list compare with recent junior days?
Yeah, so as of now, Monday evening, I think we have 20 targets on our visitors list that are expected to make it to campus for Notre Dame. 16 of those are 2027 class guys with Notre Dame offers. 4 of them are Notre Dame offers in the 2028 class. Some context for that. Typically, junior days the junior day label is applied to like a visitors weekend in January, and Notre Dame opted to push that to March this year while I was working on transfer portal stuff in January. And so and I would say because of that, the list should be bigger, right? You should be able to get more guys here in March when the weather's a little bit better, hopefully, or the kids are around their spring breaks and working on spring visits where maybe they're not traveling as far in January. But anyways, previous Januaries, there were 10 targets who visited last January, 12 targets who visited the January before that in 2024. In 2023, 9 targets visited for the January junior day. And then I pulled out some numbers from the first sort of big March recruiting events last year. The first week of practice in March, 11 targets visited. The first big March weekend of 2024, 15 targets visited. The first big March weekend of 2023, 16 targets visited. So that sort of illustrates like 20 is a very big number. And I think it's impressive. And we'll see Notre Dame continue to host guys throughout the spring. It's not going to be like a one and done sort of situation where that's the only big weekend for Notre Dame, but this should be the biggest unless by the time the blue and gold game gets here, they surpass that number, which there's plenty of time to grow that list. But I think this will probably be the biggest. These junior days are important. Some of the guys that eventually committed after a junior day visit in recent years include Tay Johnson, Bryce Young, Dallas Golden, Elijah Burris, Matty Augustine, Owen Strebig, Ebenezer Iwatade, Caden Finley, Jonas Walton, Tyler Merrill, Braden Robinson. So these are typically fruitful visits for Notre Dame. I know like the last recruiting cycle, the headline was like, I think they got 20 of their 21 official visitors who visited uncommitted to eventually commit. But these January and spring junior days are important as well.
Okay, and who are the most important 2027 visitors on the list?
Yeah, I wanted to highlight 4 guys here. The first being tight end Jackson Dollar. He's the Rivals number 2 tight end from North Carolina. This will be his 3rd visit. Someone that I believe Notre Dame is a real contender to land. Georgia's a big competitor there. He has other schools that he's trying to visit this spring: Clemson, Oregon, Florida, Miami, Ohio State, Texas, Texas A&M. So not necessarily a recruitment that's expected to end soon, but a recruitment that I think Notre Dame is a serious contender for, and to continue to stack talented tight ends on talented tight ends is something that Notre Dame would like to do, and they have a chance to do it with Jackson Dollar after signing Ian Premer and Preston Frizel in the last class. Defensive tackle Braden Parks. If you follow Notre Dame recruiting, you've heard that name plenty. He's the Rivals number 20 defensive lineman out of Chicago. I think there's a top 3 for him right now with Ohio State, Oregon, and Notre Dame, with Miami, Illinois, Michigan, Tennessee, and Georgia filling out his top 8. But I think Notre Dame really wants and needs to have some recruiting success in Chicago, and Braden Parks, I think, could be part of maybe a rejuvenation there if Notre Dame can get things rolling with him. Offensive lineman Albert Simeon is the Rivals number 2 interior offensive lineman out of Louisiana. He's a top 10 overall recruit in the 2027 class. This will be his 2nd visit. Texas A&M and LSU look to be the toughest contenders there. He's got some other schools that he's lined up visits with: Nebraska, Tennessee, Auburn, Miami, Florida, and Ole Miss. And then wide receiver is something we talk about all the time when it comes to Notre Dame recruiting. Julian Caldwell will be making his first visit. He's the Rivals number 14 wide receiver. He's a top 100 prospect out of Texas. Oregon, Texas, Texas Tech, and SMU are his other top contenders right now. So not a lot of momentum for Notre Dame with Caldwell, but getting him on campus gives them a chance to start building upon that, and isn't necessarily a guy that when I started working on the heat index a month ago that I was certain that would end up visiting Notre Dame. So Notre Dame's putting in a lot of work there to get him on campus.
You had him as plain sauce?
Yeah, he was playing. He was playing on the heat index.
Okay. And I have a recruiting question, wild card question after this one. Who are the 2028s that are coming that we're excited about? And I hope the name Bone Crusher is included, but I don't think it is.
No, Bone Crusher is not this weekend, but there are some exciting defensive linemen, a pair of defensive ends who have visited Notre Dame previously. Cameron McGee, who is also from the Chicago area, like Bone Crusher. He's the Rivals number 3 edge and number 8 overall in the 2028 class from Chicago Brother Rice. And then Jackson Vaughn's Rivals number 5 edge, number 40 overall in the 2028 class from Bergen Catholic in New Jersey, a program Notre Dame's very familiar with. Those guys have visited before. They're among the top edge prospects in the country. To get them back on campus, I think, is a big deal. And we'll see how Charlie Partridge resonates with them as he hosts them as the defensive line coach for the first time.
Okay, so my wild card question is, what's going on with the pot of gold? Is that still a thing? Tomorrow's St. Patrick's Day.
It is not. No, they accelerate. They decided not to wait for 2028 offers. That's what the pot of gold schedule would have led to previously. And when Notre Dame was out evaluating recruits earlier in the process, they decided let's put our focus in making sure kids know where we stand and not tease them to wait to announce their offer in March. Let's just get the ball rolling, and that's the way that Notre Dame has decided to go in the 2028 cycle. That's working ahead, obviously. I'm sure they'll do something to try to get Notre Dame recruits' attentions when you're the Fighting Irish and you have St. Patrick's Day. I feel like you got to do a little bit of something, but I don't expect it to be the same sort of offer palooza like it has been in recent recruiting cycles.
Hey, maybe they could turn the St. Joseph River green.
There you go. If you want to volunteer to help them out, I'll let them know.
Well, I like the fact that you rebranded Notre Dame's spring game blue and gold game instead of just the blue gold game. I like that you got our branding in there. That is, we can get the announcers that it'll be gold.
Yep. We can just start calling it that, and who's going to stop us, right? Yeah. That was subconscious. I would say. I didn't even realize I did that. That's funny.
Okay, one last spring fader that just came to mind. It was a spring game MVP. Can you name that tune?
Is it Junior Jabby?
Oh, it's Definitely Junior Jeff. The most infamous, poor kid, the most infamous. He didn't ask to be the MVP of the spring game, of the blue and gold game.
Yeah, let's maybe they'll give the center the blue and gold MVP. We'll make our own MVP. We'll give it to whoever we want. We'll give the blue and gold game MVP.
That would be cool. I'd like that.
All right. Well, we appreciate everyone being with us again on Football Never Sleeps. We, as I mentioned at the top of the show, has been scrolling at the bottom the entire time. New subscribers can get a 50% off deal for the first year of an annual subscription to blueandgold.com. Check out the link in the video description below, or head over to blueandgold.com to sign up for that. Just $59.99 for the first year of a subscription. We'll have plenty of spring football coverage coming up, with practice getting underway later this weekend, as I was talking ad nauseum about the big recruiting weekend. So I hope you guys tune in for that, and we will be back with another Football Never Sleeps next week. All right. See you guys.